Have you ever heard of the Borley Rectory, known as the most haunted house in England? Imagine a secluded structure, shrouded in mystery, where every shadow and sound seems to whisper secrets from beyond. Today we're going to explore a story full of hauntings, legends, and events that defy any rational explanation. Prepare yourself, because what you're about to hear may challenge your perception of the supernatural. It was a dark and silent night in the quiet village of Borley, England. The wind whispered through the trees, and the moon timidly illuminated the silhouette of an isolated building, the infamous Borley Rectory. Built in 1862 to house Reverend Henry Bull and his family, the rectory would soon become the epicenter of one of the most terrifying hauntings ever recorded. This is not just any story. It is a dive into the heart of the unexplained. The first manifestations occurred shortly after the house was constructed. Residents and visitors reported sightings of a shadowy nun wandering through the gardens. According to local legend, this spectral figure was the spirit of a young woman who, long ago, tried to escape with a monk from a nearby convent. Discovered, he was executed, and she was supposedly buried alive within the convent walls. Now trapped between the worlds of the living and the dead, her torment echoed through the property. But the hauntings didn't stop there. On moonless nights, ghostly carriages were seen speeding along the trails around the house, driven by faceless horsemen. The sounds of footsteps echoed through empty corridors, doors slammed violently with no breeze, and voices whispered unintelligible words in the silence of the night. Families who attempted to live there reported oppressive sensations, as if they were constantly being watched. In 1927, after Henry Bull's death, Reverend Lionel Foister and his wife, Marianne, moved into the house, hoping for a fresh start. However, the malevolent presence seemed to intensify with their arrival. Marianne was frequently attacked by invisible forces that pushed her and left her with scratch marks. Objects mysteriously disappeared or were thrown across rooms. Then, something even more disturbing occurred. Desperate messages began to appear on the walls of the house, written in childish handwriting and pleading for help. These messages were simple yet terrifying. "Help me" or "Save me." Tormented, Marianne tried to communicate with the spirit through sessions of automatic writing, but all she received were more questions than answers. Who was this entity? And why was it crying out for help? For many, the answer seemed clear. The house was not just haunted, but a vortex of supernatural energy. The house's fame soon attracted curious visitors and skeptics alike. Seeking answers, it caught the attention of renowned paranormal investigator Harry Price. In 1937, Price conducted an extensive investigation at the site, bringing with him a team of observers. For months, the team witnessed inexplicable phenomena: objects moving on their own, sounds of bells ringing in empty rooms, and of course, the recurring apparition of the spectral nun. Harry Price went so far as to describe the house as the most haunted in England, solidifying its macabre reputation. One of the most terrifying experiences recorded by Price's team involved a crucifix that was torn from the wall and violently hurled at one of the investigators. Another documented incident involved a visitor who swore he saw the translucent figure of a nun walk through a bedroom wall and vanish into thin air. These occurrences not only frightened, but also intrigued scientists of the time, who struggled to find plausible explanations. In 1939, a devastating fire reduced much of the house to rubble. For many, it marked the end of the story, but not for the residents of Borley. Even with the house destroyed, reports of paranormal activity persisted. Sightings of the nun continued around the grounds, and inexplicable sounds echoed through the ruins. Modern investigators who ventured to the site reported intense chills, electronic devices malfunctioning, and an undeniable feeling that something, or someone, still inhabits the space. More recent events include sightings of strange lights hovering over the ruins at night, and stories of visitors leaving the site with unbearable headaches and unexplained marks on their bodies. Many report feeling an oppressive presence, as if they were being watched or followed. It's as if the house, or what remains of it, is still alive in some way, guarding its dark secrets. Today, the Borley Rectory remains a symbol of the supernatural. For some, it is merely the result of collective imagination. For others, it is proof that the world of the dead can indeed touch the living. But one thing is certain: those who dare to visit the ruins of Borley never forget what they felt. After all, was it just the chill of the night wind, or the cold of something much darker? So I ask you, would you have the courage to visit Borley Rectory? Or do you believe that some doors are better left closed? Let's imagine an isolated place where the silence is heavy and the fog never lifts. A place where the dead never truly departed, where souls remain trapped between life and death. This place is Poveglia Island, a ghostly isle in the heart of the Venetian lagoon, Italy. For centuries it was forgotten, shunned and deemed cursed. But those who dared to draw near heard something else, something that shouldn't be there. Poveglia Island, now completely uninhabited, has a history that dates back centuries, a past filled with suffering and despair. During the bubonic plague in the 14th century, when the disease was decimating Europe's population, Poveglia was turned into a lazaretto. This was a medical term of the time for a quarantine station, where the sick were left to their fate, without care, abandoned to die. Those diagnosed with the plague were sent to the island, where they were forced to await the inevitable. Many died shortly after arriving, while others lingered in agony for weeks, without any help. It is said that, on the darkest nights, the flames of bonfires could be seen from afar, burning the bodies of plague victims to prevent the spread of the disease. Thus, the island was gradually transformed into a land of eternal suffering. But the story of Poveglia doesn't end there. After a long period of isolation, the island became the stage for one of the darkest episodes in its history. Fast forward to the 18th century, when Poveglia was converted into an asylum for the mentally ill. At first, it seemed like a suitable place for those who found no refuge in hospitals and clinics. However, over time, the asylum turned into a true house of horrors. The patients were treated with cruelty. One of the most chilling accounts from that time speaks of the asylum's chief doctor, who became infamous for his inhumane practices. This man, trapped in a cycle of abuse and torture, allegedly conducted gruesome medical experiments such as lobotomies without any anesthesia. He believed his science could cure mental illness, but what he truly did was leave permanent scars on the souls of those he treated. The patients were often tied to their beds, deprived of proper care, while the doctor carried out his experiments. The horror of Poveglia was only beginning to escalate. It is said that after years of suffering, the doctor began to lose his sanity. The very ghosts of the patients he had tortured seemed to haunt him, tormenting his disturbed mind. One day he climbed to the asylum's tower, ostensibly for an inspection, but instead of completing his rounds, he either threw himself or was pushed. Some believe he committed suicide, unable to cope with the guilt and madness that consumed him. But others, the more superstitious, swear he was dragged to his death by an invisible force, a malevolent presence that had already taken hold of the island. It was after the doctor's death that the reports began to intensify. People passing near the island, even boatmen ferrying passengers to Venice, started hearing unexplainable sounds, whispers in the wind, voices of agony, and on the darkest nights, screams that seemed to echo from the ruins of the asylum. But as the years went by, no one dared to venture to the island to investigate. Poveglia Island became a place of legends and superstitions. For over 100 years, it remained closed off, a location forgotten by most. But the mystery continued to grow, fueled by the stories of those who dared to speak of it. One of the greatest mysteries, however, were the apparitions that began to occur. Accounts from explorers and even tourists who tried to approach the island began to emerge, all with similar stories. They said that as they neared the island, a sense of heaviness, an inexplicable discomfort, would take over their bodies. The air became thick, almost impossible to breathe. Those who dared set foot on the island reported a constant feeling of being watched, and it didn't take long for even more frightening things to begin happening. There is a famous case of a paranormal explorer who ventured onto the island with his team. At first, everything seemed calm, but as the night wore on, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. They began to hear sounds coming from the abandoned building, as if something was dragging itself across the floor. Then, without warning, a dark figure appeared at the window of one of the ruined buildings. It wasn't a man, nor a woman, but a shadow, a silhouette that seemed to watch them with a hungry gaze. Stunned, they tried to escape, but the feeling that something was following them grew with each step. It was as if the island itself were alive, absorbing their energy, preventing them from leaving. Years later, a famous medium visited the island, attempting to communicate with the lost souls trapped there. He entered the tower of the old asylum where the doctor is said to have jumped to his death. What he revealed that night was even more disturbing. He claimed to have felt the presence of a powerful entity, an evil force that dominated the entire island. When he entered the room where the doctor had worked, the medium reported feeling a wave of violence spread through his body. He declared that the island was a purgatory, where the tortured souls could not find peace, trapped by the pain and cruelty of a forgotten past. But something else was hiding on the island, something that wasn't human, and so the mystery of Poveglia remains unanswered. The island is still there, in ruins, silent before the eyes of tourists, yet full of secrets in its shadows. They say that if you listen carefully, you can hear the laments of those who died there, the voices of those condemned to live in a hell on earth. But the real question remains, are we only hearing the echoes of the past, or perhaps, is the island still alive, waiting for the next fool to dare disrespect its name? Have you ever heard of the Amityville Mansion? That house, located on a quiet street in New York, is the site of one of the greatest supernatural mysteries in modern history. On the outside, it seemed like the perfect home, but inside, it carried the echoes of a bloody and cursed past. A house that still attracts curious visitors and paranormal investigators in search of the truth. But what really happened within those walls? Do the shadows of the past still haunt the place, waiting for the next person to cross its door? In 1975, the Amityville Mansion became the scene of a story that shocked the world. But to understand the true magnitude of what happened there, we must go back a few years to the fateful day of November 13, 1974. Before becoming the epicenter of a horror story, the mansion already carried a curse. It had been home to the DeFeo family, who, on a cold November night, witnessed an indescribable tragedy. Ronald Butch DeFeo, the eldest son of the family, committed a brutal massacre. He killed his mother, father, 2 brothers, and 2 sisters while they slept, using a shotgun. The police, upon investigating, were stunned. How could one person commit such an act of violence in the dead of night? The murder was brutal, but as shocking as it was, the tragedy was just the beginning. The DeFeo family's story became intertwined with that of the house, leaving a mark that is still impossible to ignore. When the case was investigated, Butch claimed he heard voices inside the house, instructing him to commit the murders. But was he simply delusional? Or perhaps something malevolent had already taken residence within those walls? In 1975, shortly after the massacre, the Amityville Mansion was put up for sale. Its macabre history did not deter potential buyers. George and Kathy Lutz, along with their 3 children, were looking for a fresh start. They found a beautiful, spacious, and affordable home. Little did they know the real nightmare was just beginning. At the time, the Lutz family was in a difficult situation. They needed a large house, and the price of the mansion seemed like an irresistible opportunity. When they first entered the house, they didn't feel fear, but rather an inexplicable sense of discomfort. Something about it seemed wrong. After moving in, the first few days were calm. However, they soon began to notice strange changes. The house felt colder than usual, and inexplicable sounds started occurring. But no one could have predicted what was about to happen. In the early days, the family noticed small phenomena. Doors would slam shut on their own, furniture seemed to move strangely, and lights flickered for no reason. But when the strange occurrences began to turn into something more threatening, that's when the real torment began. George, the father of the family, began to notice something that alarmed him even more. On some nights, he would wake up with a discomforting sensation, as if he were being watched. It was as if something or someone was there, hidden in the shadows of the house. But this was nothing compared to what he would soon experience. During the night, George started to be haunted by an unusual phenomenon. He felt an invisible force urging him to commit violent and destructive acts. His anger grew inexplicably, as if he were being possessed by an unknown force. As the days went by, the manifestations became more intense. It wasn't just strange noises or doors slamming anymore. Something far darker was happening. Figures began to appear. Amy, the Lutz's daughter, was one of the first to experience the more visible manifestations. She began to have visions of a sinister figure, a tall man with a disfigured face, his eyes empty of any human expression. The entity seemed to draw closer and closer, as if it were drawn to her. But Amy wasn't the only one affected. Kathy, the mother, began to feel an increasing psychological pressure. She started to have visions of horrifying faces, almost as if she were being confronted by the souls of the house's former inhabitants. While Kathy and the children experienced these disturbing visions, George became more reclusive and aggressive. He started spending hours in the living room, staring out the window with a vacant expression. The Lutz family realized that something was terribly wrong, but no one could comprehend the true magnitude of the situation. George, now increasingly distant from his family, began waking up in the middle of the night with a sense of rage and fury. He became obsessed with a figure that appeared in his dreams. It was an old man with a monstrous face who seemed to control his thoughts. Each day he felt more possessed, as if the house itself were controlling him. By the final night of the Lutz family in the mansion, terror reached its peak. The manifestations began to intensify in a terrifying way. Furniture moved on its own. Doors opened and closed with supernatural force, and spectral figures took over the house. On that last night, the Lutz family was paralyzed with fear. Kathy started to see the walls of the house moving as if they were alive. The shadows grew denser, filling the space with a suffocating feeling. George, in a fit of rage, tried to attack his family. He became unrecognizable, as if possessed by an invisible force. It was as if the house had become a living organism, consuming everything around it. That night, the Lutz family fled, leaving the house and everything they owned behind. But the evil did not leave them. The memories of that night would haunt them forever. Today, the Amityville mansion is still one of the most famous and terrifying places in the world. The Lutz family story was widely publicized, but the true nature of the events in that house remains shrouded in mystery. Some believe the experiences the Lutz family endured were real, while others claim it was all a fabrication to profit from fear. But the real question remains: were the Lutzes merely witnessing the echoes of the past? Or perhaps the Amityville house holds something much darker and deeper, something that has never been fully revealed? Because if there's one thing this story teaches us, it's that not all evil can be explained and not all doors should be opened. The Amityville mansion continues to be an enigma, and as long as there are those willing to face its horrors, the mystery of the house will continue to haunt our imagination.